I want to start this one off by talking about the quote that they opened the show with. Adversity has the effect of eliciting talents which in prosperous circumstances would have laid dormant. There's another quote by Seneca that I really like, and it goes something like, there's no man that is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, because he's never admitted to prove himself. Adversity, struggle, challenge, these things give us the opportunity to figure out what we're made of. It is requisite to accomplishment, and a sense of accomplishment, I feel like, is vitally important to a person's well-being. Just something to ponder. Let's get on with a review. We start out with Biko, and Biko is still having trouble with his gill net. And so Biko's in this bay, and it looks to me like the whole thing is fairly shallow, which makes it difficult for having any kind of success with not only gill nets, but just fishing in general. The vast majority of my shoreline was like that same thing. Like right out from my camp, it was, I don't know, I probably would have had to gone out maybe 60, 70 yards to get into 7 feet of water, and that just makes it tough. Luckily, I did have a couple of areas relatively close, and you see later in that episode where I'm standing on that big rock. I probably had 10 feet of water pretty close off that rock, maybe 30 feet out from that rock. It got relatively deep. Now, we never see if Biko like explored up and down his beach to try to find some deeper areas. I'm sure he did, and they just not showing it. But anyway, shallow water just makes it tough for the fishing. So we get a good look at Biko's fireplace when he's trying to warm his feet up, and he ends up burning some holes in his socks. But we see that when Biko built his fireplace, he built it on the outside of his cabin. And I did the same thing, and I've gotten a couple of questions about that, and I'd like to address that right now. So people are asking, like, why would you not build that inside and take advantage of all that thermal mass of the rocks being inside your shelter? Because if your fireplace is inside, it heats up all the rocks, and then after the fire goes down, it just continues to, the rocks continue to give off that heat. And that is absolutely true. So ideally, if you're going to build something like that, you would build it inside your shelter. Now, I don't know what Biko's reasoning was, but for me, the reason that I built mine on the outside is because the mud that I had to work with was mostly sand, and it just didn't seal up the cracks very well. And so if I had built my fireplace inside, it would have just smoked me out. There's no way that I could have had that fireplace inside and actually stayed in that shelter. And so ideally, yes, I would love to have had the fireplace inside, but the materials just wouldn't allow for it. And I suspect that Biko had something similar going on. So we see also Teresa in this episode, and she talks about how declining body condition and lack of sleep can impact your ability to make decisions. And I can definitely vouch for that. When you get into a state like that, especially the sleep part, there were times, like I slept pretty good out there, but there were certainly times, and this is something we'll talk about here in a little bit when we talk about med checks, but Coulter had also mentioned not being able to sleep the night before a med check, and I definitely experienced that, but like I said, we'll cover that here in just a little bit. Teresa is also, it looks to me like she's eating primarily rose hips. I don't know if that's truly the case, but it looks like she's in an area where there's quite a few rose hips. And the good thing about rose hips, so there was 2 berries out there that persisted well into the cold weather, and that was high bush cranberry and the rose hips. So even in the previous season, season 7, we saw Roland out there late, like really late, picking rose hips. He actually ended up killing a porcupine when he was out looking for rose hips. But that's one of the great things about those rose hips is they will stay on those bushes well into winter, and they actually get better the longer it goes. They kind of shrivel up a little bit. They get really sweet. All right, moving on to Coulter. So the first thing we see of Coulter is his boat is underwater. Now, I've seen several times when people have asked questions like, why does he leave it in the lake? Why does he not just drag it up on shore? Now, I can't speak for Coulter. I don't know exactly why he left it in the lake, but I suspect it was because he thought that if he drug it up on shore, that a bear might get into it. And I probably would have done the exact same thing that he did. Of course, bears can swim. We saw the bears swimming around out on Biko's beach. But I would think, personally, I would think that the boat would be safer out in the water than right up on shore, especially if you're hauling fish into it and you know you've got that fish scent in the boat. You know, if you had that thing up on shore turned over, it would be nothing for a grizzly just to put his claws on that and tear that tarp to shreds. So I think he made a good move. I think that was a smart decision to leave it out on the lake. Honestly, I'm surprised that it didn't sink sooner. With the waves and the wind that we had out there, I mean, it was nothing to have, you know, 2-foot breakers coming up on shore. And so I'm really surprised that it rode out on that lake as well as it did for as long as it did. So a lot of people would have let that defeat them. They would have let that be the last straw, but Coulter just keeps chugging on. He cuts the rope, he gets the boat up on shore, bails it out, fixes a couple of ribs and gets back out there, and he's got a nice big bull trout in his net. We get to see him come back, start a fire, cook up some fish soup, which he's super excited about. I was really happy to see him get a little bit more food in him. Now, he also mentioned something that I found very interesting. He talks about getting winded when he's not doing anything, and that's something that I personally experienced as well. You know, when you're on such a limited diet for so long, you get weak like you've never experienced being weak before. Any kind of physical activity you do just is absolutely draining when you don't have anything to eat like that. But not only don't have anything to eat, but just haven't had anything. Your body is just so depleted that if any kind of physical activity that you do just completely drains you. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some of the things that they showed me doing, and then I want to cover, like, the med checks were a big part of this episode, so I want to talk about that, and then I want to go back to Coulter. So we'll get to that here in just a minute. So you can see right off the bat, I lift up I take off my shirt, I'm adding another layer or two, and you can see that I'm very thin. And so later on, after the show wraps up, I'm gonna talk about that. I'm gonna talk about weight loss and how much weight I estimate that I lost out there. We'll talk about gaining that stuff back, where I'm at now, months and months after I came out. It's a long recovery period, so we're going to talk about that here in a future video. So in episode 9, you see, like, one of my biggest things in that episode is me getting really fed up and frustrated with the gill net, and it looks like I totally give up, but I didn't give up. I did get frustrated, and I actually did. I gave up on it, but I can't not think about that stuff. You know, I have a problem. I can't figure it out. I give up on it, and then I go back to the tent and I'm thinking about it, and I can't not think about it. And I have other ideas, and then I have to put those ideas into action. I can't just let it sit there. And so that's what I did. I go out, I put the gill net back out, and then actually end up catching a fish. But the problem was, Teresa had it figured out. She was smarter than me. When she put her line out, she separated the pull lines, and so they couldn't get round up together. I didn't do that. And so when I caught a fish, the fish, I think in conjunction with the waves, got that net all wrapped up around both lines. And so my clothesline system didn't work, and I wasn't able to pull it in. And so I ended up having to just pull everything, you know, the anchor rock, the buoy, and everything in. Luckily there was a fish in it, and so I at least got something for my effort. But then I couldn't, you know, I put that whole system out before it got cold. And by this time the water temperature is not something you want to go swimming in. And so there was no way that I was going to be able to get that back out there the way that I had it. So I just basically used the same system and chunked it off that big rock. By that time, the lake level had actually dropped. It had probably dropped, I don't know, I'm guessing a foot or so. And so that enabled me to get out to that big rock without getting wet. There was no way early in the season I couldn't get to that big rock without getting wet. And so I went out there, threw the big rock off, and reset my net off of that rock. And so I didn't give up on the net, and that's something that I really try to reinforce to both Finn and Coy, is that life throws us obstacles so that we'll have something to overcome. So I approach this challenge in the same way that I approach life in general, and that's with a constant pressure towards the direction that I want to go. You know, things aren't always going to work out the way that we envision, and when they don't, that's fine. But don't let that defeat you. Just look for another opening, and when you find that, start moving forward again. So one quick question that I want to address is people keep asking me about the rings. Like, where did I get these rings that I use for setting up my pulley system? And to answer that, they came off my belt. When I went in, I had a ring belt, and they had 2 rings on it, and I just took those rings off and replaced them with a ring that I'd made out of wire. Another question that I keep getting is, why don't you make a raft? I actually thought about making a raft, but you can't really get a very good idea of what the weather was actually like by watching the show. They tend to show a lot of the nice days, but I can tell you guys, the nice days when there was no wind and no waves were very, very few. I felt like if I had made a raft, I could have gotten out there and I could have fished. I could have reset my gill net the way I had it originally, but that raft would have gotten blown down the lake, and there's no way that I could have gotten it back up to where I started from. Absolutely no way that I could have gotten that back up to where I started from without a tremendous amount of physical effort, and I didn't feel like I wanted to put that type of effort into poling a raft around or anything like that. It was just too windy. So also in this episode, I find some fresh lion sign. Like that sign was very, very fresh. I'd been out hunting that morning. Unfortunately, there was no snow at that time, and so I wasn't able to find that track. I mean, I actually did track him for a little while, but tracking an animal in conditions like that is possible. It's just you can't. Anyway, my tracking abilities, I just can't do it quickly enough to overtake him. And so what I'm looking for, ideally, what I want is a fresh snow, and I want to cut that line. I want to find a fresh track in fresh snow, and when you do that, then you can just walk fast, and you actually have a chance of overtaking that cat. And like you saw in that episode 1, my plan is to, when I find that cat, getting as close as I can to him and just running at him and trying to get him to pop up a tree, which is, you can definitely do that. And so that's what I'm thinking. And I also, a little bit later on, you see that I build a predator call just to try to bring that cat in close to me. Unfortunately, right after I built that, the next morning I got up to go see if I could find that cat, and right off the bat run into fresh grizzly sign. And I hadn't seen a bear, I hadn't seen a grizzly track in probably 3 weeks. And so I just figured they had all gone to sleep, and obviously that is not the case. There was one that came right down the little ridge that my shelter was on, made a circle right around, very, very close. I never knew he was there until the next morning. And I'm sleeping there, you know, with a bag full of jerky above my head because I assumed that they were all asleep, and I had stopped wearing my bear spray. After I saw that grizzly track, I started wearing it again. So also I made, I'm just trying to keep myself occupied, and I made a little float plane for koi. Ends up pretty cool. The alder there had just the perfect amount of twist to make a little propeller that actually works. But I don't know, I might, if you guys have interest, I'll show you, I'll recreate this. I did this whole thing with my axe and my Leatherman, but if you guys have interest, I'll do a video on recreating this little guy. All right, so now that we have made it through, everybody, I want to talk about med checks, because med checks in this episode, this was a big part of it. You know, they really played up the who's going home, who's getting medically pulled this time. And so I want to talk a little bit about this. Coulter mentions not being able to sleep before the med checks, and that is something that I definitely experienced. It was a nervous time, and you put your entire fate in somebody else's hands. And that's, you know, when you live out there like that and you have no one to answer to except for yourself, when you have to hand over all of that control, that's a stressful thing to have to endure. There's a pretty telling scene if you watch closely at the end of the episode when they're doing Teresa's med check, and the doctor asks, "Do you feel like you've lost any more weight?" And she just says, you know, it's like, I know exactly what was going on in her head, because you're so afraid. She knew that she had lost weight, but you're so afraid to tell them anything, because in your mind, anything that you tell them, they could use against you. And it's in your mind, when you're in that state, it is against you, even though it's for your own good. It's, you know, at that late in the game, you are so invested that you literally would starve yourself to the brink of death. And so, you know, the medical crew has a very important job. They have a very difficult job. A job, you know, making those calls isn't something that I would want to do, because I don't know, you get people that are super dug in, and I think sometimes you don't realize the condition your body is in, and you always feel like, I can do it, you know, I can do it. I'm not giving up. I can make it one more day or one more week. So yeah, they have a tough job. Another thing that we see in this episode is, you know, during the med check segment is, they have these powwows, right? So they come in, they do your med checks, they check all your vitals, you know, they ask you how you're feeling and all of this, and you do your best to not look like you're, you know, on the brink of death. And then they go off, you know, 30 feet, and they sit there and they like have these little powwows, and they talk about you. They talk about what they're finding. And you sit there and watch this. You watch them discussing your fate, and that's you don't know what they're saying. You have no idea, and you're worried. You're already worried about what their conclusion is gonna be, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's a difficult thing, you know. After being responsible for your whole existence out there, to just hand over the entire control of everything. That's a difficult one. All right, so now I want to revisit Coulter. So in this episode, towards the end, Coulter gets medically pulled, and I hated to see Coulter go. I know a lot of other people out there feel that same way. I mean, the thing that I love about Coulter, first of all, he's a good guy. I mean, he's just genuinely a good dude. He's very, very likable, and just a genuine person. But the other thing that I really like about Coulter is he never stops. He never gives up. He never seems to, anyway, he never seems to get discouraged in a way that stops him from looking forward. I mean, he's gathering firewood. He's doing all of these things so that he can stay till the end. Unfortunately, it's just this is a hard place to make a living. I feel like Coulter's strategy with the boat and the gill net, I feel like anywhere else, if we were on Great Slave Lake or anywhere else where the fishing didn't just suck ass, I feel like Coulter would have absolutely crushed it. Towards the end, he talks about, you know, how his poor performance, but God, man, I can't agree with that. Coulter did awesome. He did amazing. He was positive the whole time, and like I said, he never quit. And he's hard on himself. But Coulter, dude, you did awesome. I'm gonna come visit you in Alaska, and we're gonna see if we can't rustle up some adventure when I get up there. Hopefully, we'll come up there next year, but I definitely want to come up there and see you. Coulter actually came and visited me just before Christmas. He was in Idaho visiting his folks, and his folks actually live not too far from me. So we got to get together and have dinner. But I can't say enough about the guy. He's just, I mean, anywhere else, like I said, another time, another place, and he'd still be right there. All right, guys, that's gonna wrap it up for this video. Like I said, if you guys want to, leave me a comment. I'll redo the airplane and then maybe the Predator call that I built. But if you guys want to see anything more or have anything explained in more detail, let me know. Just drop me a comment. And then also, I want to remind you again, I am working on a book that covers my whole experience. You know, there's so many things that happen out there that you just can't get from the show. The show is like, I love the show. I love the show alone, but it's like reading the back cover of a book. You know, you get the highlights, you get a general idea of what happened, but the story is so deep. But I'm working on a book. It's at the editors right now, working on getting that back, and hopefully we'll have that available before Christmas. But if you're interested in getting notified when that is available, go to my website, twistedstave.com. I'll have a link down in the video description. Scroll to the bottom of the home page and sign up for the mailing list. There's a little box down there where you can put your name and email and stuff in there. I'm not going to send you a bunch of, you know, spam marketing stuff. I'll just send you notifications on when new videos come up and, of course, when the book comes out. So go to the website, subscribe to the channel. We got one more episode left. It's Teresa, Biko, and myself. I'm really interested to see what happens. Next Thursday, it's the final episode. We'll see you, and also I'll have another video coming out before that. Not sure what it's going to be about. Maybe redoing the airplane. But anyway, we'll see. We'll see what the comments say. We'll see you guys next time.